Daniel Malloy, I'd like you to meet the vampire Armand. The love of my life.
Thought this was a game?
911.
Officer, right there. FBI, come on!
Oh, Louis. You really know how to pick 'em. So I watched the season finale of Interview with the Vampire, and what was not to love about any of it? I'd be lying if I said that each episode didn't do a good enough job in drawing me in. Now, I do want to preface this little review by saying that I'm more familiar with the 90s movie and casually familiar with the book series itself, but I did brush up on some stuff. I did also watch Queen of the Damned, but I'm not gonna lie, y'all, I was bored throughout the whole thing. I know that's preaching to the choir, but literally the movie's only saving grace was Aaliyah. So, the finale. So we already knew Claudia and Louis were plotting to kill Lestat from the previous episode, and everything was set up to be this massive send-off. People were catching on that they not human, and Lestat's like, bro, we gotta go. He's talking about going to Buenos Aires, cause he wants nothing to do with the vampires in Europe. France, Greece, Italy, he don't care. He said no Europe whatsoever. Claudia manages to convince him to leave, but throw a huge ass party where they're gonna fast and they're gonna pick out the humans they like. Basically a massive suck it New Orleans. They're gonna pretend that they'll be inviting them to become vampires and then they eat them. But one of the humans will be poisoned and that's how they're gonna get Lestat. Now Claudia is mainly the one doing the planning, because Louis is that one friend that keeps going back to their toxic ex. Like, you keep telling them they can do better, that they don't deserve you, but they keep going back. So Claudia was smart in that regard, because basically all she told Louis to do was pretend to be falling back in love with Lestat. Louis is worried about falling back in love, and Claudia is just like, don't worry, I'll pull you out when it's time. Of course, Claudia, I love you, but some people don't want to be pulled out. It ain't that easy, and I'm sorry you had to learn the hard way. So we meet with the one dude who had a mustache actually, but don't remember his name. But he doesn't have the mustache anymore, so let me tell you something. This man had nothing to do this episode but be disrespectful. So they go to him about Lestat wanting to be the Raj, and he laughs at it at first, but Lestat does get what he wants. So we get these scenes of Claudia plotting, like the one scene where she's buying the poisons, and then we get the party. So they're picking people out, giving them little flowers to signify that they've been chosen to become immortal. There's these two twins, and Lestat seems enamored with them, as a meal. So Claudia poisons one of the twins. At least, that's what she tells Louis. Then we get to the moment. They have their special guests at their house, and they're telling them this bullshit story about how they became immortal. Lestat is like, oh yes, it is a special water that I drank years ago, and then I gave some to my companions here. They all tell when they were born, when they drank the water, and how old they actually are. And combined with the humans being drunk, it sells the lie. Homeboy is like, I want that water. And so he opens the thing and there's nothing in it. And then the feast begins. Lestat eats Homeboy. Louis straight up rips someone's whole ass jaw off. And then when all is said and done, the twin that is poisoned is left, but we also see someone break into the house at that moment. It's revealed to be Antoinette, and she is also a vampire now, which caught me off guard, but I think that was revealed or at least alluded to in a previous episode. So it turns out that Lestat embraced Antoinette so that she can act as a spy, because the maker cannot listen to the thoughts of his childer, but the childer can listen to each other's thoughts. So she has been following Claudia around and listening to their conversation in their heads. This was actually hinted at earlier in the episode when Louis heard someone say dog and thought it was Claudia, but Claudia was like, that wasn't me. So we get a double cross to the double cross. Then we get Lestat holding down Louis while Antoinette tries to force Claudia to eat the poisoned twin. This is funny because Lestat is also going on about how Antoinette is going to be a better version of Claudia and she's going to be better for our arrangement. And I'm just like, that's not gonna happen because of how we see Antoinette is obsessed with Lestat. Like, homegirl is not gonna accept being chosen over Louis. She would have not have stayed the happy side chick. However, Lestat starts growing weak, and Louis and Claudia gain the upper hand, where it's revealed that Claudia didn't poison the twins. She actually poisoned Homeboy. Claudia knows how petty Lestat can be, so when Homeboy laughed at the idea of him being Raj, Claudia already knew that Lestat was going to want to get back at him. And sure enough, that was the first person Lestat ate. Not to mention the fact that Homeboy was being hella antagonistic throughout the whole party. So he sealed his own fate. There's actually this really dramatic moment that I loved where Lestat is dying and he's giving this dying proclamation about how he loves that Louis is there in his final moments. And me personally, it got me. I was like, this is low-key romantic. It ended up making me miss First Kill even more though. Like, for real, people did not see the vision with that show. Interview with the Vampire is Broadway, but First Kill was a high school production of a Broadway musical. People don't see the vision. So Louis tries to omit what they did with Lestat's body, but Daniel knows better, and because of the condition of Claudia's journal and how the pages are missing, Daniel kind of guesses that Claudia was upset with Louis, and we as the audience see that it's because Claudia wanted to burn Lestat's body, but Louis was like, no. So Daniel points out that Louis chose Lestat over Claudia again, and that's what she was really mad about. So this sets Louis off, and Rashid interjects, and he's like, I'm trying to protect you from Louis. And then we get the final reveal of the season, that Rashid is actually Armand. And this was alluded to throughout the season, with Rashid saying stuff like, oh, I was here before Dubai, and of course the flashback Daniel has where he remembers that the first time he met Louis, Rashid was there. Daniel does note that he saw Rashid standing in the sun, and Rashid says like the best line I've ever heard in a while. He says, what is a mediocre star to a 514-year-old vampire? I ain't never heard somebody diss the sun like that. So yeah, Rashid has been Armand this entire time, and Louis is just like, he's the love of my life. And when Louis said that, I was like, Louis, girl, if you don't get it together, again, I haven't read the books, but I've heard some things about you, Armand. I've heard some things about you, and I'm watching you. So a lot of people forget what an adaptation is, so they were upset with a lot of the changes, such as moving the timeline forward, aging out Claudia, and of course making Chloe and Claudia black. Some in that group choosing to straight up not watch it, which is their prerogative, not saying that they're not allowed to do that. But when I tell you that doing that is a missed opportunity to not see how this story of this show gives us this amazing story about Louis being a black man in 1910s of the South and trying to make something of himself. What I did love about the original is that it full on said, yeah, Louis and Lestat owned slaves. Full on. Because in a lot of media, there's this apprehension to actually diving into the history of a vampire, where there's a question of this, did this really old white vampire own slaves? Did they take part in the Inquisition? Were they a conquistador? Yada, yada, yada. But so many like to dance around that answer because they want their vampires to maintain their appeal to be the perfect anti-hero for an audience that just wants hot vampires. And I get it. I like my hot vampires too. I like my hot vampires with some nuance though. So it lessens the character for me personally, because you're like phoning it in. You can't unmonster the vampire. They literally have to feed on humans to survive. Might as well go on in on their history, right? Some are hella open about it, like Twilight, where Jasper was straight up a Confederate soldier. But that wasn't relevant to the character as much it was just relevant to Stephanie Meyer's Mormon ass. There's also the Vampire Diaries TV series where the showrunners were very much Team Grey, even having the brothers be Confederate soldiers too, or I think it was only Damon. But coupled with the fact that the showrunners had a massive hate boner for Bonnie and Kat Graham, it was a whole mess. It's all the more reason I am gonna do a review on Vampire Academy. It's also one of the main reasons I love Vampire the Masquerade. Yes, I'm not gonna miss an opportunity to drop it in there because I fucking can't. Because it's straight up like, not only were there vampire slave owners, but a lot of the main issues are because vampires benefit from humans being too preoccupied with hating each other to rise up against them. Literally, one of the best recent examples is in one of the Choice of Games stories, Night Road, where you will encounter a vampire, or you can encounter a vampire that is benefiting from the American concentration camps that currently exist, and they are using those people as blood dolls. And the game never asks you to like get over it either. The game does let you approach it with your own morality in mind, because you have to remember that much of Vampire the Masquerade and its gameplay is steeped in keeping your humanity intact. All of this to say, I love that there was this aspect of Louis's character. Granted, the movie kept that in the background ish. Which brings us to the series where Louis's character is kinda changed. I think Louis's journey is so great in the show because we see the setup to how Louis can be ensnared by Lestat. First off, we got Louis playing the nice little Negro for the white men around him that don't see him as a partner, but more like a dog that walks on his hind legs, and they think that's cute. But you also get Louis's relationship with his family, where his family pretty much relies on his income, but they look down on him. His mother has this passive, low-key neglectful behavior, like she wasn't actually taking many of her children's concerns and issues seriously. Like, in the time that Paul was alive, can you name anything that she's done to make sure he was okay in the show? And then speaking of Paul, he's literally a religious zealot in the worst way too, because he has like issues with Grace's fiance wanting her to jump the broom. Like, Paul, first off, jumping the broom is our thing as black folks, not some other. So in general, Louis is mad isolated. And with Lestat's power and his obsession with Louis is the perfect prey, which is how abusers usually do it. They find someone that's easy to isolate. But the story of Louis and his vampirism is one of bubbling anger that's been festering, and with Lestat being as dramatic and extra as he is, this deep down desire to fuck up everyone that's been looking down on Louis is coming. And I love just how it unfolded. Maybe because I love when black folks get to unleash our rage, but it was always satisfying to see Louis give people what they deserve. Of course, Louis is not perfect. Despite being a vampire, Louis's major fault in his adaptation is how he still wants to maintain a human existence and be out there. He still wants these human connections that he cannot have anymore. But that's because Louis's been trying to lift himself from what people expect of him, and while being a vampire has empowered him, it's also taken away his desired path. And it's rough because a part of that path is staying with his family. He has a lot of pride and he can make rash decisions because he's trying so hard to keep it together. Like him killing the alderman, which leads to the whole attack on the black part of town, that's very reminiscent of Tulsa, which I definitely think is relevant because Louis low-key wanted to make Storyville prosperous. Not so much for everyone, but as a means of proving that he deserves to sit at the table with these racist-ass white dudes. Louis, in general, for the beginnings of his unlife, has this pseudo-morality to him, and Lestat constantly calls it out. Because in the book and the series, Louis makes people a commodity. He's a slave owner in the book, and he's a pimp in the series. These are two professions that you can't be like, oh, don't worry, they were nice. If anything, this is a part of his character that aids the fake morality bit that he harks on so much. His desperation to not be like Lestat when he is in the same category, he's just unnerved by how proud Lestat is about it, which kind of plays back into the religious themes of the series. In general, there's this apprehension to the truth and dealing with it for Louis, which is probably why he fell in with Rashid, aka Armand. Because judging from how Rashid mothers Louis, it seems like he enables this aversion so Louis does not actually have to deal with the emotional weight of certain things, and so Louis can depend on him. Rashid even mentions that it's him that saved Daniel from being attacked by Louis during the first interview. So I'm excited to see how Louis progresses or regresses now that he's separated from Lestat, but those feelings are still lingering. I will take Louis' section to say how much I hated his family. Maybe I'm being a bitch about it, but Even before Louis was a vampire, his family was just so patronizing to him. It can be somewhat forgiven about Louis' profession with the little options there were for a black person at the time. That's an aspect of history a lot of people don't think about, especially when it concerns racial biases. Their father pretty much left them penniless. Louis picked up the pieces the best he could, but they always acted like they were better than him because they weren't pimps themselves. They just benefited from one. His mother especially, who clearly had a passive approach to parenting, who just randomly decides to blame Louis for Paul's death. And it feels so obvious that she's just not trying to confront how she wasn't really there for Paul. She just sat there pretending to be a peacemaker. And then Grace slowly turned into it too. Like, I get that this was supposed to be sorrowful and dramatic, but the eye roll I had when she showed Louis his little gravestone talking about, "You're not my Louis." Like, yes, he is. He's always been like that. I might be alone on it, but maybe not. It just reads as people who are so used to someone being their doormat, where they could just constantly demean and patronize them. And then when they, like, stand against it, it's like, "You've never acted like this. You've changed." This is especially when they realize Louis is gay. Like, you being in cahoots with the devil is one thing, but I draw the line at you being gay. Oh, I'm a star! Please, I'm a star! I love a messy bitch, which is why I love Lestat. I feel like we still have remnants of when people are like, they love messy bitches, but then the bitch is messy and they're just like, clutching their pearls. Like, sis, you and I signed up for the leopards eating babies experience. Why are you surprised that the leopards are eating babies? The episode where Louis and Lestat get into an actual fight, well, fight is like putting it strongly. The episode where Lestat beats the fuck out of Louis had people being like, this is such a character assassination. Lestat would never. And like, maybe it's just me, but my mindset is that when someone is abusing somebody, nothing is off the table, especially once they've successfully isolated them from people to turn to. It was given, I can excuse emotional manipulation, but I draw the line at physical abuse. And I'm just sitting here like, you can excuse emotional manipulation? But if there's one thing Lestat is gonna do, it's be Lestat. Lestat gives off this very bratty person who's been through some shit. Lestat and Louis are very dangerous in their own ways. Louis is dangerous because of how he's been conditioned, so he lets things fester, and when they explode, they explode. Lestat is dangerous because he moves around New Orleans like it's his personal playground, and you get the feeling that it stems from his desire to never go back to Europe and how confined he was there. And as he constantly puts it, yeah, he's bad, but there are other vampires that are straight up monsters. This is what he tells Claudia and Louis especially. So, just thinking about how much of a loud brat Lestat is, and how much of a menace he is, to think about there are worse people than him, that's scary. But it's because of how Lestat is that made him predictable, especially to Claudia. Lestat as a character, especially in Interview with the Vampire, is a dangerously good time. It's fun when it's fun, but it's the next morning and you're just like, this is actually bad. Because now you have a mess to clean up, and you have to do it. Because Lestat is a mess that's not going to go away on its own. And he's definitely not going to clean it up. He's going to ask you, why do we have to clean it up in the first place? When I tell you Sam Reed bodied this role because he sells the drama of it all with Lestat. The proclamation of love, his dying words, and how he describes the hunt, Lestat is such a toreador, bro. And Sam Reed captured it perfectly. But for as mixed as New Orleans is with Lestat, it was his little bubble that he brought Louis and Claudia into. And with Louis, his red string soulmate, now being out there in the world, his bubble is shattered. I think what makes Lestat so entertaining is because of just how much he's Louis' opposite, but even as Louis says that he's matured now and so he can tell the full story, you do get the feeling that it's not completely true, and it's not being completely fair to Lestat. This thought is only given weight by the slow reveal of Louis actually being an unreliable narrator, again clocked by Daniel. Season 2 might dive into the vampire Lestat, or it might not, but I'm gonna be happy to see Sam Reed's Lestat again whenever he shows back up.
I don't believe in the glorification of murder. I do believe in the empowerment of women.
Like I said, two changes that people had beef with was aging up Claudia from 5 to 14, but also making her black. Two aspects that proved to be a good choice. Even in the movie, despite Claudia being 5, Kirsten Dunst was actually 11 years old because at the time they didn't really think an actual 5-year-old could deliver the existential dread of Claudia. But also from a legal standpoint, it was hard having an 11-year-old constantly filming for the movie, and for a show, it would have been even harder. While that's the reality of it, the show justifies these changes pretty well. One being that Claudia is revealed to be living in Storyville with her aunt who works as a prostitute. So she's in the house when the Storyville massacre happens. Again, her being near death is still Louis' fault. In fact, it brings a bigger scope to the issue about just how much his actions set off and how it is literally affecting everyone. Not just the people who work as pimps and prostitutes and all this other stuff. It even affects the children that are living among them. But also, having this existential dread is more believable at 14 than it would be at 5. I feel like a lot of times we easily forget just how not developed kids are at 5. Yeah, like, I know, like, in vampire universes like this, it's like, oh, they mentally age and stuff like that. But it's also like, in modern day, Claudia is sitting there watching Bluey. Just want to point that out. Claudia is the Bluey age demographic. But it is because she's still young that Claudia ends up being a menace, which is one of the movie's highlights. And that's majorly what I did want the show's Claudia to deliver. And I was not disappointed. I think making Claudia 14 was a good plan because of just how extra we know tweens and teens to be. So a 14-year-old contemplating life and dread and all of this stuff makes perfect sense. And when you add her into the mix of Lestat and Louis' drama, it's chef's kiss. I feel like this went unnoticed by a lot of people, but also may not have. But many people joke about how Lestat essentially baby traps Louis and sees Claudia as a means to keep Louis by his side. And the youthful energy that Bailey Bass brings to Claudia really sells that. For a moment, her excitement at her own life can make some people forget that Louis and Lestat are terrible for each other. But that's how the child is a band-aid thing goes. Of course, oftentimes the facade goes away pretty fast, but not with Claudia until she starts having life questions and stuff. In the mind of Lestat, Claudia is the pet he got for Louis to keep him complacent and in his grasp. In the mind of Louis, Claudia is initially the daughter he thought he could never have, his redemption for bringing death and destruction to the people of Storyville through his action. From the moment of her unlife, she was meant to be a pawn for their own egos, and it's her autonomy that helps break the facade. Some of her best moments are the ones where she's facing off against Lestat and she's growing and learning his tactics. Ultimately, she really is their daughter, their child. She's a mix of both of them. She has Lestat's flair and acceptance of the brutality that is being a vampire, but she also has Louis' romanticism, the one that blinds him from actually leaving Lestat. In the same way, she can't leave Louis behind because she cares for him so much. I'm so excited to see more of her in season 2, and I'm personally curious as to how they'll keep up the facade that she's the same age. Because, like, if you watch The Umbrella Academy, one of the main reasons 5 is always in the same outfit is because they know Aidan Gallagher is gonna age. So it's a visual way of saying he's the same age. But it'll be interesting for Claudia because Claudia's whole thing is that she hates that she's not gonna age. But I do wonder if, outside of her smells like teen spirit attitude, will there be something visual? Like her not really knowing how to style herself in a typical adult manner, but more along the lines of something a Disney Channel tween would wear. Like, she tries to dress mature, but there's this like little bug in her brain that's like, wear the most audacious thing you can find. And that's never gonna go away because she's forever 14.
BFFR. What did that spell? Be fucking for real.
Another one of the changes with this adaptation is making Daniel older, while making this the second attempt at doing this interview, obviously referencing the 90s movie. I really enjoyed Malloy's character in this show, because in the book series, you eventually get Lestat being like, yeah, this is not totally true, and then he gets to tell his own story. From the start, Malloy is essentially the skeptic of all of this. Like, he knows that Louis is a vampire. That's not the part he's skeptical about, right? He's skeptical about if Louis is telling the truth. He's matured since the last interview to just not take the bullshit, especially because Louis in the beginning is like trying to goad him into letting the story just sweep him off his feet. And Malloy is just like, yeah, the last time I did that, you almost killed me. He questions every fucking thing Louis tells him, and he takes it with a grain of salt. Between Louis' telling and reading Claudia's diary and his prior experience with Louis, Malloy is the character that takes us out of the ride. If you as a viewer get caught up in the theatrics of Louis' life, Malloy is basically be fucking for real. It could have been so easy just to make Malloy's entire character greedy, pompous reporter, right? But he's not framed like that. Can he be a dick? Yeah. The whole thing where he is acting like it's imperative for him to know what happened to Claudia that night was like the height of his dickishness. But he still was making a good point that once the story is out there, what people read into, how people read into it, that's how it's gonna be. Death of the author and all that, right? Before, his loyalty was to the experience of what he was interviewing people about. Now, when at a much more older age and kind of been around the industry for some time, he is more loyal to the truth now, simply because he's tired of the theatrics. Louis, as somewhat mentioned earlier, has not found a way to confront terrible emotions. He does not want to confront the bad, especially when he is the cause of it, and Armand has only enabled that. But Louis is very adamant about this interview happening, and he's like, oh, I want my tragic story told to the world. And Malloy keeps reminding him that once it's out there, what Louis intended for is not going to be the case. But Louis does not want to hear that. And through that, Daniel essentially becomes Louis' foil in the way that Claudia is Lestat's. From my view, Louis and Lestat have this childish view of certain things, despite the fact that they place themselves as wiser and like more aged like wine than their personal foils. Despite how much knowledge and wisdom and age and blah blah blah, all of that good shit that they have over Claudia and Daniel are still the ones that are able to pop their bubbles. Interestingly, Interview with the Vampire is not where Daniel's story ends, and he's very much still present throughout the series. But with this adaptation changing the timeline, I'm excited to see what changes for Daniel and his involvement in the story. I essentially love Malloy for the same reasons I love Claudia and Lestat, and that's because they're all sassy little shits. So it has been confirmed that there will be a season 2 of the series. Thank goodness that this is not Netflix, because Netflix would have been like, alright, 86 it. Everything about this season was just phenomenal. And with them finally getting out of New Orleans and with the original story having them go to Europe and eventually encounter the fucked up vampires that Lestat always alluded to, it makes you wonder what the series' take is gonna be. All I know is that because of how good the writing is and how good the actors are, I'm not gonna be ready for the scene where Claudia and Lestat go their separate ways for a while, because that's what that last bit of Claudia being mad at Louis is leading up to. But anyways, I do hope you enjoyed this little review. I do plan on doing a few more of these. Well, not a few more, like I plan on stopping them, but I haven't been watching anything else outside of like the other ones I'm planning to do reviews for. So I do like this little format of just like going over the finale and then talking about the characters, well, the really prominent characters, and then, you know, just ending it from there, because it's like short, simple. I don't have to put too much work into it. I do plan on eventually doing Vampire Academy, like I said earlier, and I also want to do season 2 of Chucky and Wednesday. I just have to decide which one to do first. Honestly, it's looking like Wednesday, but I could literally change that in like a split second. But anyways, I have been Miss Hexley. This has been Interview with the Vampire, and I'll see you guys later.
She's calculated.